question. And the beauty is that Dahlia, is that right? Is a new staff over at Metro Health with the Ace Nashville crowd, which we're super excited about. And Dahlia has worked for the Nashville Food Project. So we asked, and it really is just about food that like Whole Foods, grocery stores, places like that couldn't sell. So that's where it's recovered from, in case you go to reading and have the same question. But it was delicious. Thank you for being here again. Grab some food if you you're hungry and want to take it home with you. We're excited to get to have just some conversational time with Dr. Sage today. We're thankful for him coming down for Tufts, for the federal government, I think is what we talked about, for Centerstone, just supporting this work in our state. And it sounds like many of you are familiar, but you may have some other questions. And I think we just wanted to start. Did you want to start with anything in particular? So I may make you come stand.
So I was chatting during lunch. I chat with people, not like online, but in real life, actually. And so there's a question. I want to tell a story. So one of the things that happens is that there are people who grow up in impoverished communities, and the people who work there can get very distressed because situations are tough. And are we making any difference? So a few years ago, I was invited to speak at the International Foster Care Organization in Darwin, Australia, which was really fun for me. But afterwards, we had a series of meetings. I met in Sydney with people from around the country. And an Aboriginal preschool teacher told me that she loved Hope. So I said, why? And she said that she works in an impoverished community. And she told some of the stuff that happened there. And she felt like she was not able to change the world and that the situation was still pretty tough. And then she learned about Hope, and she learned that for all these young children, she was giving them an opportunity to form relationships with their staff and with each other, to engage in that small community in the preschool room for emotional growth. And boy, has that happened in center-based childcare. They always had food and all those things, so that those children were going to grow up having had all of those experiences and being able to hopefully be able to better deal with some of the other stuff that was going on in their community. And she was like, I'm not doing her justice. She was so inspired. And it's just amazing to hear how people hear about Hope and understand themselves better as well as their clients. They had an outreach worker in Idaho. Herself had been a foster child, and it felt, she did her ACEs score, somewhere along the way, and her ACEs score was like 10, I don't know, 2,000, some high number. But then as she learned about Hope, she realized all the other things that had gone on in her life, and that she had to couple of natural children and a few children she had adopted from the foster care system, and she understood herself better and was able to use that in her work. And so I want to just encourage you, as you're working with yourselves and your staff, to realize that each and every one of us has experiences. And if our training focuses on, if you have an ACEs score of this, your chance of suicide is that, it's not very inspiring for people, because when we're doing these things, we're all scoring ourselves as well as scoring our clients. So I want to encourage you, sort of, as many of you here are managers, or just sort of bring that out. It's very rewarding to figure that out. And that's, I think, where a lot of the strength and energy around Hope comes from, is that people can relate to it from their own experiences and from the experiences and stories they hear from their clients as well, and feel like their work is really meaningful. Because one of the hard things about the work we do is when we're entirely deficit focused, all we hear about are failures. And you don't see the beauty in life. So anyway, so that was from my lunchtime, a little reflection from my lunchtime conversation I thought I'd share with you.
We will, I'll kind of be our roving reporter on the street. If you have questions or thoughts or stories or whatever, I also may ask you questions if you don't ask us questions. So that's your fair warning. All right, Kate, when Kate asked the question, will you repeat it so that?
Yeah. I'll repeat it for all you online folks. I'll try to do as good a job as I can.
Kate Key. I was an intern to last year. You said something in your talk, alluded to something really. You used to think that the positive experiences mitigated basis, but it's there been sort of shift in the research that suggests something else. Did I hear that correctly?
Sure. So, yeah, so Kate wanted to know, I mentioned in my talk that our thinking about PCEs mitigating ACEs had changed. And so, first of all, PCEs mitigate ACEs. There's lots of data around that. But I think that what we now think is that we kind of had it backwards, right? And the children need secure, nurturing relationships, safe and equitable environments to live, learn, and play, opportunities for emotional growth, and engagement. They need to feel they matter in the world, whether it's helping in your second grade classroom or being on a football team or a choir or delivering groceries to old people. We all need to feel we matter. So that some of the original work really looked at people who had adversity and how these experiences helped uncouple adversity from bad results. And that's absolutely true. But I think the reason why we changed is a little bit subtle. And that is that if that's all the positive childhood experiences do, then a policy response would be, let's take everybody's, for example, ACEs score. If an ACEs score of 4 or more, we have to make sure you have relationships, environment, emotional growth, and engagement, right? But we think that that's, okay, it's not bad because people need it, but actually everybody does. And because, for 2 reasons. One is because it's true, well, 3 reasons. But the second ones are that part of what happens, and this is sort of the parable we heard at the beginning with the carrot and the egg and the coffee, that what you bring into it helps you. And I recently gave grand rounds at Boston Children's Hospital for their psychiatry department. And where they've come to thinking is it's partly what happens to you and partly how you process what happens to you. So when they had kids who experienced trauma, but were in, for example, a stable family situation, and it passed and it went away, they had many fewer effects. And we know that even people with a bunch of ACEs, some of them are fine, right? So they think it's how you process that. So giving children, positive childhood experiences can help set them up to process adversity that happens and make them more resistant to the bad effects. And the second thing is because all of us want children to grow up strong. Like I'm a father, and when our kids were born, I didn't look at my wife and say, Adam is such a strong looking, wonderful infant. I sure hope that he goes to a safe injection site when he's older, even though that's harm reduction. Fortunately, he never needs to do that, but we all want the best, and these things help promote that kind of growth. And I say that partly because it helps us align with parents' hopes and dreams, so that if all you're doing is aligning with their fears, it really changes the dynamic. So if you're aligning with hopes and dreams and fears. So the bottom line is that in all of medicine, the first way you learn about how part of the body functions is when it doesn't, right? Like God did not give us a pancreas so that it could go wrong and we could get diabetes, and didn't give us hearts so we could have heart attacks, right? So you learn about it because, like ACEs, you learn about dysfunction, because children who have these horrible experiences are more likely to have problems. But then you got to backtrack and get a better understanding of what normal function is. So that's why we're not saying that PCEs don't mitigate ACEs. we're saying that PCEs are primary, they're required for development, and then you can go through each of the 10 ACEs. So if your parents abuse you, because of course most maltreatment, we all know, comes within the family. There is some stranger stuff, but mostly it's people who you know, love, all those things. But if people violate that trust and hurt you or ignore you, then it affects your relationship. It affects the feeling of safety in that environment. Um, there's often a lot of family secrets, so that diminishes engagement. And that's so well known in intimate partner violence that the controlling partner doesn't want the victimized partner to go out in public because they're afraid that that person would explain what's going on at home. Same thing happens to kids, right? So all of these forms, whether it's parental substance use or mental health or incarceration or abuse or neglect, they all interfere with PCEs. And so we think that that's actually the way to think about the mechanism and to unite those two ways of looking at things, because ACEs are actually really bad for you, right? And PCs are actually really good for you. So it's a little bit subtle, but I think that for us, the most important thing is we think every child and family should be supported in having opportunities to access these PCs. Thank you for asking.
Do you have questions? The question in the chat.
Okay.
Or just unmute.
You can, if you're, those of you who are online, unmute yourselves and shout out, or if you put something in chat, Jordan, right? Yeah, he's sitting there looking at the chat, feeling lonely. So you would make him feel better if you'd add questions or comments to the chat. And then he'd get a bonus this year at the end of the year, right? Yeah.
I'm keeping up with Citizen. Could you explain the process of becoming a Hope faculty member?
Sure. So it's a little more complicated. So first you talk with the man, then we work it out with you, because it's a very much one by one. But for large organizations, if you want to be able to train your own staff to become Hope facilitators and do it routinely as part of staff training or whatever, you can train facilitators. And what Amanda and that team will do is work with you so you know all the tricks to teaching someone to become a Hope facilitator. And then people who are trained by your organization can become certified Hope facilitators. And the first organization that did this is the San Diego County YMCA. They have 3,500 employees. So, and they work in, I don't know, many 17 branches, and each branch has multiple programs ranging from after school basketball to foster care and childcare. They're the largest. You guys know the YMCA is the largest childcare provider in the United States by far. So they want everyone to get this training. They want facilitators everywhere. So they work it out. So we'll talk with you, and if you want to do that, that's something that we just started offering last year because of the YMCA kind of taught us how to do it. And we'd be happy to do it again and again and again. Because okay. So can I tell a story, another story? So I told you we're a quality improvement project. We try to get everything, try to measure how we're doing, whether we're reaching everyone. And we're having a really hard time with our improvement scientists, because our goal is for every child to have access to positive childhood experiences. And every provider of services, whether they're a doctor, a psychiatrist, a judge, to understand the Hope framework, understand what children need. So then they say, okay, so how are you going to measure that this year? So that's where we are. But I think that our goal, I mean, I say that because our goal is really disseminating this so that all the children who we all care for can have those experiences and lead better lives. So we're happy to work with you on that.
Since you have a question, just see your brain.
Do what? Not yet.
Oh, yeah.
It's like
First, we take over the track 6, Nashville. You talked about exposure to positive childhood experiences and how to track that. It appears there's those sources are coming from the family, the parents, it's coming from the child care, preschool, schools, as well as the after-school programs such as the YMCA. It's all those count. It's positive childhood experiences. So, is there a community in the country today that's tracking all that today?
Right. So the question from Richard is, how do you track positive childhood experiences? And he commented they could come from the family, they could come from the community, they can come from the Y, in theory from healthcare. We try to be positive. All over, is there any community in the country that's tracking it? And the short answer is not exactly in real time. And that's one of our challenges. And we're working, so in Massachusetts, our Department of Health has a dashboard where they're reporting geocoded information about that. And in California, they have a program called Kids Data that looks at that. So some of the questions are pretty simple. They have surveys of school children, and you can ask children, this is not the exact survey question, but do you feel engaged at school? Do you feel appreciated? And what proportion of kids are doing some kind of productive after school thing, or any after school thing besides watching TV or playing video games? So those things. And then I think the other issue that we're really struggling with is people who work in different fields look at how far does a child live from a green space, from nature, and are there parks available? So we're also working, and there's something called the Children's Opportunity Index from Brandeis University, which has geocoded information about opportunities available to children. And that's a completely different way of looking at it, because there, the data set are what resources are available in the community that promote children's opportunities. And then there are green space alliances all over the place that look at children's access to nature, access to outdoor play, all of those things. Because we know that play is really important for kids. It's not, it is. And that children can't play if there aren't playgrounds, green spaces. You don't want to have an adult supervising them at every moment, because they got to do that, but they have to be in a place that's safe. So how do you do that? So those are two different approaches. And Richard, we're going to talk later. I would love to have more measures to look at that. And then Angie Miller at the Department of Health here is among other people around the country who are doing these adult look-back surveys. So you're an adult thinking back to your childhood. And those are beautiful. There's also the Youth Risk Behavior Survey from the CDC, which asks kids questions. And I think YRBS is every other year. Right. So Minnesota Department of Education every other year, and it's in 50 states, and they can add questions. So that's another way where there's some questions there that correspond to that. Great. And I just Jordan, if you get questions from the web, just feel free to raise your hand. Okay.
With multiple people interested and everybody still doing their own separate programs. One of the best practices to get all those people on the same page, on the same messaging at the same time.
So the question was, if you're a large organization with thousands of employees, what's the best way to get everyone on the same page at the same time? And so I think it's a complicated question, because in a large agency, there are people with very different functions within the agency. So what I would say is that the message needs to come from the leadership. And I'm thinking of one place we're working with where the leadership has announced that this is a goal and people can get basic training. either the facilitators or online or just by osmosis because it's around. Posters around that remind people that our organization believes in hope and has the building blocks. And then so you have that kind of as a superstructure where everyone should have consciousness raising, awareness. And then we're working with a big agency again in San Diego County, their Department of Child and Family Wellbeing, which includes what used to be the Child Protective Service. And what they're doing is they're breaking it down function by function, and then not doing the whole agency at once, but they have the whole agency have this like general idea, and then they're going to specific groups within the agency and say, how do you incorporate hope in the work you're doing? So they just have a new group of family resource centers, and the center within the department that's administering that is diving deeply into hope to understand how that applies to their work. And what that agency has done is chosen the first places to start that might be a little more amenable to change, and then generating FOMO for the other parts.
On for, what exactly you said there, piece of this.
Sure. So the question, I didn't catch your name, but the question was, Hannah, thank you, was a question about LGBT youth and what we know about that group of people and what we're doing about it. So two pieces of data we've collected. We had an article with our colleagues at the CDC in their publication called Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. Do you ever read MWR every week? I'm reading it. Anyway, where we looked at PCE data from 4 states. And what I said was adults who identified themselves as being lesbian or gay reported fewer positive childhood experiences than their straight peers in each of the 4 states that were looked at. So one of the things is, no big surprise, because they're now adults and the world was different then, probably, who knows what it's like now, but they must have experienced a lot of limits on their lives and prejudice. So that was an issue. Hopefully less now, but I'm sure it's still there. And then we worked with a school district in Wisconsin. It's a pretty large school district near Madison, and their school survey asked kids about kind of what you did after school, a bunch of things, and also asked them to identify their gender. And then we looked at gender minority kids, kids who were mostly kids who were trans or kids who were non-binary, because this is Wisconsin. Those were options on their survey. And then we saw that those kids responded to the same kinds of positive experiences as kids who were not gender minority, right? So they had lower rates of drug use and a couple of other bad outcomes that we looked at if they had those positive experiences. For some of the experiences, they were not quite as powerful as they were for the straight peers, but the direction was significant in that direction. So conclusion, kids are kids. Trans kids do the same things as straight kids do. And sometimes they need more because of a lot of other things going on in their lives. It must be confusing to be a teenager and working through this. So that was kind of the main conclusion. And the other thing, if you dig into the details of it, is gender minority kids were less likely to feel, not how they felt, they were less likely to report participating in athletics, less likely to report participating in some other after-school activities. And the only one where they participated at the same rates as their straight cisgender peers was in drama, which is interesting. And so the policy thing is that we can talk forever about athletics, I'd rather not. But the policy idea is that kids find what interests them, and you want to make sure you're funding a variety of things: music, arts, sports, computer camp, whatever. because you want everyone to be able to feel engaged. And, you know, in some kids, like high school kids in particular, just get engaged through politics. There's apparently there are elections going on this year. So lots of opportunities to get involved in local or national politics. Doesn't matter. What matters is that they feel that they matter and that being part of something, whether it's your church choir or stuffing envelopes for a candidate, you feel like you're making a difference. And that's really important.
I'll come up here where I can ask it so people can hear. So you may have spoken of this, but as you know, I was a little distracted earlier this morning.
Oh, why?
But in thinking through PCE, so one of the things that we know is those 7 that you guys originally identified are awesome. Because with ACEs, we started hearing more about expanded ACEs, additional ACEs, ACEs of location. Is there more work ongoing to identify even more like research-based positive childhood experiences?
So the question, I'll just repeat it in case I need to. The question was, is there research going on to identify more positive childhood experiences? And the answer is yes. And we worked with the RAND Corporation on a systematic review. And there's things that we learned because we're fortunate. We live in a very diverse country. So in the Latino communities, there's a concept called familialism, which has instruments and you can cut different scores. I think I'm still there. Okay, I'm still there. Good. Glad to know I'm back. And so familialism is a concept that there's a fair amount of research on, which doesn't exactly translate into relationships or engagement. And you can kind of twist it and put it there. So we're thinking about that. And we're looking now at more details. But research is really funky. Can I complain about something? Okay. So when we look at these large national studies like the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, we know that positive childhood experiences influence a person's physical health, lower rates of heart disease, lower rates of cancer, as well as their mental health, depression, and substance abuse. But if you look at the data and the programs that are designed to actually make a difference in people's lives, they're by and large around mental health and substance use, overwhelmingly around them. So our team did a little study within a study because we were disappointed. We had done this literature review for the CDC. And they said, well, what about physical health? You must have missed it. So of course we redid the survey, didn't find we missed anything because we had a really good librarian. And then we looked at the funding sources, and funding for looking at ACEs and PCEs is from the National Institute of Mental Health, the National NIDA, the National Institute for Drug Abuse, the NIAAA, National Institute for Alcoholism and Associated Disorders. So they were providing the funding. And guess what they provide? They provide fundings for looking at mental health and substance abuse. The National Cancer Institute has by far the largest budget of any of the NIH institutes. And we know that there are positive childhood experiences epidemiologically based on work we've done with the CDC affect cancer rates. The amount of money they spend at looking at ACEs and PCEs is close enough to 0 to count. Similarly, heart disease, which is, I think, still the #1 killer of Americans. And there's a connection between heart disease and adverse childhood experiences, well known, well published. And more recently, we've done work on positive childhood experiences, which seems to be roughly the same effect, size, just in a different direction. And NHLBI, which also has a big budget, has showed it's a big killer, is in funding that. So I think we talk about stigma around mental health, and we often talk about it that our clients, patients, participants don't want to get mental health services because of stigma. And you look at my Uncle Sam, and it's almost the reverse. They don't want to look at the physical consequences of our psychological experiences. But not they don't want to, they just, I don't know, I can't describe what they want to do or not want to do, they just don't. So anyway, so with data, the answer to the question is we have some data, we're expanding that data, And one of the things we'd like to do is get a better handle on physical health outcomes. Mhm. Great. Okay, go ahead.
So I was wondering, if you have book recommendations that have kind of like general ideas that are like similar to the hope ideas or have the hope, like in them. And I was also wondering if there are any hope or hope-based programs in New Mexico. That's where I'm from, and a lot of the like stigma and stuff is really prevalent in New Mexico. I grew up like with just hearing about like drugs and alcohol and all of it.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
grew up in the stigma, so.
Yeah. So first question is books. And I've been thinking about writing a book for a while, and I've been thinking about it. And the problem is I stare at a blank screen and it doesn't write itself, which is really annoying. But I just finished reading Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Anxious Generation. And it's about the expansion of adolescent mental health problems in the past 10 years. And he talks a lot about what kids need in that book, and a lot of it resonates with, he doesn't ever mention hope. Sadly, he's going to get a letter from me. I'm sure he'll read it and take it to heart. It's Haidt. And a lot of things he writes about really talk about what children need to thrive. And a lot of the book is about how when girls immerse themselves in social media, they miss that interpersonal interaction. And there are a lot of consequences to it, among which the one that really resonated for me, there's so many, was that in real life, you have relationships. You're going to go to school with these kids every year, and you have a stake in those relationships. So you need to repair them, and you can't just go flaming out. And you can't really tell people, you can't block people, unfriend them from your life, right? So social media creates these very extreme, unusual, I was going to say weird, but that's a loaded word, weird idea about relationships, because you don't have a stable stake in them. You have all these people who like you. And the other thing it does, particularly for young girls, is it provides a metric, like how many likes do you have? And all of us as teenagers psychologically think that everyone's looking at us. But the only good thing that we now know as adults about teenagers is no one's looking at anybody except themselves, right? All these things are happening. Your body's changing. If you're a boy, your voice is changing, all that stuff. And then he goes on and he has other stuff about boys and boys becoming disengaged from real life for a variety of reasons, and describes men who basically never leave their rooms because everything they need is on the net. And that's not good. So that's his book. So that's the book answer. The second question was New Mexico. If you look at our website, you can search for facilitators and champions by state. You may find some in New Mexico. If you'd like to reach out to us, we'd be happy to work with you. The current president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, Ben Hoffman, spent part of his career in New Mexico. So I'm sure he has, we'd be happy to work with him and them and try to expand what's available there.
Oh, a few questions. One, I just think we have people in some of these name I'm forgetting. Formerly with Sandra was talking about tying together all of the national institutes and having trauma informed practices or something be part of their applications in the future moving forward. I wonder if you could comment on that. And then the other thing I think, and I go back and forth between positive child experiences and not toxic stress, but powerful stress, and trying to resolve an age-old question about whether you should give participation trophies at the end of the T-ball season.
I am not going to go into participation trophy discussion. But what I'll go back to the NIH question in a second. But what I do want to say is that what sports teach kids, other things do too, but sports in particular teaches you how to win and how to lose. So if you're a baseball fan and your hero has a 333 batting average, I can do the math really quickly for that one. That means 2 out of 3 times he goes to bat, he does not get a hit, right? And so those people who have a hissy fit and throw the bat at the umpire or think I'm no good every time they strike out don't become baseball stars, because failure in the moment is part of it. And so I think that protecting kids, what happens is if you can make it past that, as a child, I can get past this level of frustration or difficulty. And it was awful and I hated that, but I'm on the other side of it now. So when something else comes up, you can do it yourself. And that's one of the dangers of too much adult intervention, is the example I gave during my talk about kids in the playground arguing about the rules. If an adult comes and solves the problem, they're solving the wrong problem, because they're solving the problem of what is the rules. They're not solving the problem is, how do I learn to negotiate conflict with my friends? Right. And so really thinking about all of those things. And in Haig's book, what he calls it is anti-fragility, which is that the kids, and he's a scientist, little animals do the same thing. You have to experience some risk so you know that you can do it. And then the other question was NIH. So one of the things about government funding for research is it's all subject to peer review. And peer reviewers are people who've been funded by that agency. So there's a very, very, very strong bias towards doing things that are similar to things that have been done before, either an outcome study or methods. So you can have innovative methods, you can do this, but it has to be something that people who used to do it would appreciate it. And if you come up with something that is out of the box, it's going to be very hard to get government funding. And so one of the things is, personal examples, my own work has almost entirely been funded by private foundations. Because private foundations have, their mandate is to make the world better. And so it's been an interesting career for me in academics and academic medicine, because I don't have major NIH funding, but I feel like I've done something good. So I think that the whole issue of this is going to have to come from the basic observation that leaders love to follow. So that as people become more aware of positive childhood experiences and even ACE's effects on health, the leadership will have to come to terms with it and deal with it. So, not a quick process.
Mentioned tracking the number of players and finding people. So if you were to divide that by population, what states that have the highest percentage of people trained in health?
Okay, the highest proportion. Well, Tennessee must be pretty high. I don't know, what's the population of Tennessee?
7 million.
Yeah, because you have, I think, I'm sorry. The question was, has the highest proportion of HOPE facilitators and champions per population? So Tennessee's got to be pretty good, because it only has 7 million people, and you have a lot of facilitators and champions here. Idaho now has a HOPE facilitator or champion in every county in Idaho. And last I checked, no one lives there. I mean, not no one. But it's a pretty rural state. California has a lot of interest in this area, but they also have a lot of people. So I can't really do that. But I would say that we are now active in 47 states in the country. And active means having facilitators or champions or having been in a regional meeting like this in that state. So it's pretty much of a national effort. We've trained well over 50,000 providers in those 47 states. So I can't tell you per capita. Tennessee's pretty good though. Okay.
So recently, and I was going to go make April Scott talk to us. Maybe I'll do that first.
Oh, please. April, what are you hiding back there?
And Dr. Christina Bethel, and also the Montana Institute and
Yep.
Dr. Lincolnbach.
Yep.
And so she sucked me in, is the moral of that story. And it's been a pretty good journey so far. But I was going to ask April if she would tell us just a little bit about how she even got started with this with Centerstone. I don't know if I know the story or if I do. It's just hot and I can't remember it right now. But I'm going to take her the mic.
Will the remote people hear?
No, but you have to come up here. That's true. Do you mind coming up here?
Yeah.
Because we think a lot in our state about where things get started. If you remember, if you've been with, I'm not doing very well with words, but I came to the state about 10 or 11 years ago. And I got here maybe 2-ish years was when the adverse childhood experiences work started coming. And it was really Lorraine Lusinski, if you're familiar, who was one of the ones at Department of Health who was like, we are about to take this on. And so when I think about our Building Strong Brains work, my brain just automatically goes back to Lorraine and Mary Rolando and Linda O'Neill and some of those early champions. And so when I think about hope framework and positive experiences and the science of the positive, which is what the Montana Institute focuses on as well, I think about my friend. And so I just would love to hear kind of how you got started, because it's been a while. You've done this for a while.
And so,
Well, you can stand over here because they don't like to steer
gladly let me be behind the podium. So when I first went to a 0 to 3 conference, I believe it was in Washington, DC, and heard about all the adverse childhood experiences study, I walked away being totally mesmerized and horrified at the same time because it just felt like a death sentence. And so from that moment on, it was between 2010, 2012, I was like, what can we do about this? Like, what can we do to prevent these risk factors and promote, mental health for children across the lifespan? And so I had been searching, and my good colleague, Kimberly Ladd, who we were paired up with, they had a Murray County Prevention Coalition to work on preventing substance use with youth. And we had a neonatal abstinence syndrome action team that was led by Kenny Young back there. And we were doing a lot of the same work. So we reached out and came together, and she had shared with me Science of the Positive. And so I hopped on there and started doing a lot of research and looking at different peer-reviewed journal articles. And I would see Dr. Sege linked up with Dr. Lincolnbach in a lot of those publications. And then I was like, well, let me check out what they have going on over here. And so I was looking for models and frameworks that were infused with the science of the positive, and that's when I found hope. And so that was what took us off on our journey. And I guess that was 2020, maybe, when we started working on that. And then it's just been our goal to push this game frame out across Tennessee as what's next. We're not stopping talking about that concern and the ACEs, but what can we do to really prevent, mental illness and prevent substance use as much as we can on the front end. And I want to also recognize Dr. Dixon over here for sharing some of the latest research from 2023. I think it's Hana that we can protect children's mental health. We can promote resilience despite or in spite of ACEs. And so that kind of goes along with the conversation about mitigation versus, those promotive factors where we can just really promote resilience and health overall. I feel like I'm rambling, but I had no idea that we're going to have to answer this question. So, did that kind of get us the reading stuff? Okay.
And personal thanks to April, because she's been such a supporter and insightful in terms of what we're doing. So a lot of the improvements in hope have come from talking to April. Yes. Oh, good. Oh, wait, great. The answer is yes. On our Hope website, there's a place where we have all the facilitators and champions listed by state, and each person has their city and town listed, and usually their organization. We have some freelance facilitators who are there. So go to the Hope website, which is positiveexperience.org, and it should be pretty easy to find from there. And if you want, you can add your name to it just by learning to be a facilitator. But you'll see, I did a printout of all the people in Tennessee. There were quite a few champions and quite a few facilitators all across the state.
And I will send an email after our meeting that has a summary of it, the video, the recording, and I can link to that as well in that email summary.
And Melissa, I'll send you the Word document that has them,
Oh,
but I
perfect.
encourage you to also look at the website because people are still undergoing training and stuff.
Awesome. Any other questions? We're excited at TCCY. Like I mentioned, I got to go to the Montana Institute this summer and meet Dr. Jeff Linkenbach and his team, which I had honestly not done a lot of investigative work into that. But when I got there, it's all connected.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't really realize that. So we're excited to embrace the HOPE framework, to really start moving forward positive experiences in any shape, form, or fashion. So any last parting words?
I'm so happy to hear that you guys went. So we Hope got its start. I started going to the Montana Institute and met Jeff, and we were at the CDC, and we also I'm affiliated with this Center for Study of Social Policy that develops strengthening families. And I got to work at the American Academy of Pediatrics, to work with something called Bright Futures. So there is this whole movement in different fields. And Jeff has been really instrumental, and the Summer Institute is amazing in pulling this out. And what Jeff's key message is the positive is there. You just have to find it. And that's been remarkably effective in everything from reducing drunk driving to alcohol and substance abuse. And it's really remarkable.
It was definitely cool. My friend Dave Walker in the very back also was there and asked a question and said, "Hey, I'm from Tennessee." And of course I'm like, wait, who is from Tennessee? Because I'm in Montana. And so it was really cool to kind of, because Dave, you're with the National Guard, right? So even just different fields here and there, it's just so cool to see.
Yep.
You have a question? I'm going to say no, but if you need one, email me and I will create you one. But I mean, we have a generic like certificate I can make happen. But I'll put it in the chat, or Sasha will put it in the chat. Dave has a question. I'm going to run back here.
And just while she's walking back, for all of our asynchronous online courses, you can ask for and get a certificate of completion if you complete it.
Flourish, and that is really kind of what led me to the Montana Institute. Among also Kimberly Ladd also is a longtime friend that pointed me in this direction. Can you comment on how that ties together psychology positive, sociology positive? It's all kind of science positive. Any compare and contrast to that approach?
No, now I have another book to read though. Thank you. I was looking for books to read. But I think the other thing that we've learned and incorporated in some of our training is a related thing called narrative therapy. And for those of you who are actually are mental health people, please forgive me if I'm totally simplify it. But one of the questions in narrative therapy is, tell me about a time when things worked for you, even if only for 5 minutes. And then so we ask people to do as providers, if everybody had something worked for them sometime, unless they're terribly depressed, different story. You can recall that. And then you can think about at that time, what were relationships that made that possible? Where were they? What were they doing? What was the environment like? How did they get a feeling that they mattered and that their actions mattered? So engagement. And then now, as you're working with someone, emotional growth is how can you learn from something that happened to you where things were okay to apply it to what's going on now. And so what I mentioned in my talk, moms who were struggling with substance use disorder, once I realized that something good happened, because they had a baby who they were caring for, and they came to the pediatrician's office. Think of all the things that had to have gone right with them. So then you can have conversations with, how did you get into or stay in recovery? What was challenging for you? What made it possible? Who supported you? Where were you? Like, were you living on your own? Were you in a residential treatment program? What helped you? And then when the baby was born and the people from the Department of Children and Families came, how did you convince them that your condition was such that it was safe for you to care for the baby? And then you listen. And thinking about relationships, environment, engagement, and emotional growth can help you start with those questions from narrative therapy, which is a kind of positive psychology, to then use the structure in your head to be able to reflect back, identify what their strengths were, honor them. It's really terrific that you had a partner who was with you through that whole journey, and then promote them. This is great. So now what? What are we going to do with that experience? And one of the questions that the American Academy of Pediatrics asks us to ask parents is, who helps you with your child? And that's also a fascinating thing, because none of us can raise a child without some support from someone somewhere, even beyond the partner we may have. And so listening to that, and it was really fun for me, because I had this woman, I'll never forget her. She said, nobody. So I said, okay, what about your neighbors? And she said something unprintable about her neighbors. What about your parents? Well, they're really unhappy I had this child. They're not there for me. What about your job? What about this, that? So it totally struck out, right? And then at the end of the clinic, I was walking through the waiting room, going home, and there this mother was just jabbering away with another woman in the waiting room who had a baby about the same age. She says, Dr. Sagi, I want you to meet Susie, whatever her name was. I met her in rehab, and she has a baby the same age as me. And so what I had done is planted the seed that having someone who can help you in case of an emergency is important. And even though I did not have the personal satisfaction of writing down on my piece of paper, it planted that seed for that person. So part of the lesson there is, people listen when we talk. We may not get the satisfaction in the encounter that they get it, but it's actually really important. And having an open mind, not being judgmental, but just having them think about it is so important. And we can do that.
It's part of our leadership team, and if you put a comment in the chat that says, Dr. Deepesh Navasaria, pediatrician, used the term consilience as he spoke to a group of pediatricians about the broad ecosystem that promotes and supports PCEs, a great term for what I believe we are feeling.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
I was going to take that comment home with me.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Sege.
Thank you.
Thanks. Can you help me say thank you? It really is a privilege to have him with us. He was with us about a year and a half ago at our first Resilient Tennessee Summit. We also had Dr. Christina Bethel here. And so it was a great tag team to kick off our summits. So we hope to have him back multiple more times, but we're appreciative of your time and thankful to have you with us here in Tennessee. So
thank you. Thanks again for inviting me.
All right, friends. Online friends, I know you like to see us. Online friends, thank you for being here. We appreciate you. I will send out the recording and all the information you need afterwards, and we will see you soon. In-room friends, I have still swag from the summit that's in a box, in addition to your fans, cups, and towels. If you need them, want them, need something to burn in your bond.